everybody, this is Marty Rocket back again with another Rocket vlog. As always, it's the last Sunday of the month as opposed to the last Thursday of the month, since we've decided to have a bit of a schedule change here at the Rocket Hideout. So with it being the last Sunday of November, we're doing a video review again. This time we're going to look at another comic book series. Last week at the Rocket Hideout we took a look at Sonic the Comic, which was a big comic book series that I enjoyed in my childhood and was the only comic that I collected in my childhood. If you haven't read it yet, feel free to go and read it. The URL hopefully will be somewhere down here or somewhere up there, so that you know exactly where to go, and so you can have a read of it yourself and see what you think. So that was the comic book series that I read in my childhood. Many of you might be surprised to know that even when I was a child, I never read the Spider-Man comics. In fact, really, I still haven't read much Spider-Man stuff over the course of my life. Spider-Man's very much been one of those things, as you might know, if you've been reading the Rocket Hideout long enough, you'll know that because Spider-Man started in the 60s, I never had that sort of real drive and urge to read it, since I wasn't there from the beginning. However, Spider-Man has, or at least The Amazing Spider-Man I think it was, ended sometime last year with issue 700. For those of you who don't know, spoiler alert, in that issue number 700, Peter Parker, the guy who's always behind the mask of Spider-Man, actually dies. I guess Marvel wanted to reboot everything, since the comic in question today is part of the Marvel Now series, I think it is, which was a big Marvel rebranding. And basically, we're going to look at the comic book series that continued on from The Amazing Spider-Man. And if you're up on your comic book stuff, you already know what it's called. It is The Superior Spider-Man. Now, I have here the first graphic novel of Superior Spider-Man, called My Own Worst Enemy, which comprises the whole first story arc, I guess, of the Superior Spider-Man series. It collects issues 1 through 5 and chronicles the events of Peter Parker's death. So you're probably asking me now, if you're completely unaware of this stuff, well Marty, if Peter Parker's dead, how is Spider-Man carrying on? Well, in a roundabout way, Peter Parker died, yes, but from the best that I can tell, and if I'm wrong here, feel free to chime in with a comment and correct me. I think, as best as I've got it, Dr. Octopus, Otto Octavius, is dying, and he switches his mind in his dying body with Peter Parker's mind. So, presto changer, Otto Octavius is in Spider-Man's body, and Peter Parker is in the dying Dr. Octopus body. Hence, that's how Spider-Man dies, because Peter Parker is Spider-Man, and, you know, Peter Parker's in Octopus's body, and Dr. Octopus dies. But in a roundabout way, after entering Peter Parker's body, one thing that I suppose Otto Octavius never suspected to happen was that he inherited all of Peter Parker's memories. And through inheriting all of his memories, he kind of gets a feel for what Peter Parker's been through, I think, and everything like that Peter Parker has felt in his life. So, with all that in mind, Otto Octavius actually decides to turn over a new leaf and actually carry on being Spider-Man in Peter Parker's wake. And he actually says something like he's going to be not just Spider-Man, but he's going to be the superior Spider-Man. And that's the whole reason for this graphic novel right here. So, as I said, it collects issues 1 to 5, which I suppose My Own Worst Enemy is kind of the foray into Otto Octavius' first month of being Spider-Man. So it actually starts off not basic, but typical in a Marvel sort of comic book story, I guess. As I'm flicking through it here, Otto Octavius, you know, is kind of saying farewell to his old life, because now he's resigning himself to the fact that he is Peter Parker. And immediately in New York City, shit goes down. A group of hoodlums, including famous Marvel villain the Shocker, have come into town, and they've called themselves the New Insidious Six. So with Otto Octavius deciding that he's going to pick up where Peter Parker left off as Spider-Man, he immediately heads for New York City where this stuff's going on, and he tackles this new Insidious Six. Is it Insidious Six or is it Sinister Six? See, I think it was Insidious Six in the Spider-Man cartoon from the 90s, but I get a feeling now that it was the Sinister Six in this comic. Let's have a look. Yeah, it's the Sinister Six, so I'm sorry about that, but we'll carry on. Either way, you know, Spider-Man heads there and he deals with this new Sinister Six, and he, being Otto Octavius in Peter Parker's body, since Dr. Octopus was a member of the Sinister Six, he was actually quite insulted that this group of nobodies has picked up the name, and as Spider-Man actually puts it in the graphic novel, they're just letting anybody into the group these days. And immediately from that point, you kind of get a feeling that despite Otto Octavius sort of deciding, okay, I'm going to be Spider-Man and I'm going to carry on what Peter Parker started, he's still got a lot of that egotistical nature about him, because he's insulted that this group of nobodies has decided to carry on as the Sinister Six. A group that, as I said, Dr. Octopus was in, so he's kind of insulted with that. I guess you could equate it, if you're not sort of getting it, to if you were a member of a sports team and maybe like 6 years later you've retired and sort of come back to have a look, and the same sports team have recruited a bunch of people who aren't up to your sort of athletic level. I guess that's how Octopus felt, and he was extremely insulted by that, so he takes the Sinister Six out later on in the graphic novel pretty hard. In fact, that's a running trend in this graphic novel. Well, there are two running trends in My Own Worst Enemy. The first being that Otto Octavius' ego is still prevalent all the way through. Obviously, Otto Octavius is a genius. He's a very gifted man, and usually being extremely intelligent and gifted in that regard, you usually get somewhat of an ego about you, obviously because you're above average. And it seems like every twist and turn in this book, whenever he does something good, he can't help but seethe internally because Peter Parker's getting the credit, and that's something that really sticks in his craw. Another big point about the Superior Spider-Man is how it's really noticeable that Spider-Man is a lot more ruthless in this. For example, when he's dealing with the Sinister Six in a big fight, he takes on Speed Demon and one of the others, it escapes me who it was now. But basically, Otto Octavius as Spider-Man, he uses his scientific intellect in his background, and he creates lots of like little gadgets and sort of weaponry to sabotage the Sinister Six. And he basically makes it so the Speed Demon's big wheel thing actually shuts down, and when it shuts down, it actually, because it's just like one big wheel, when it shuts down it falls flat like that, right, just like that, and it actually ends up squashing another member of the Sinister Six. And obviously that's not something that Spider-Man, well, Peter Parker would have done. And that actually brings me on to another big factor about the Superior Spider-Man, is how despite Peter Parker being dead, the ghost of Peter Parker actually survives. And you find this out at the end of issue 1, if we have a look. Yeah, so Spider-Man's doing his thing and he's taking on the Sinister Six at the end of issue 1. And at the end of it, Peter Parker actually returns in a ghostly sort of Jagger-like entity. Now, if you don't know who Jagger is, you need to look up the 1980s Thundercats, and that will give you an idea. If you did watch Thundercats back in the day, you know what I'm talking about. So anyway, as we have a look here, or as I try and find it, where is it? Where is it? Where is it? Here it is. Okay. As you can see here, at the end of issue 1, Peter Parker returns in a ghostly form, and he actually stops Spider-Man from killing. Who's this guy? Boomerang, that's it. He, sorry, I'm not completely familiar with all these characters, so I have to look. I'll be glancing through the book a lot. But yeah, but he's about to kill Boomerang, but Spider-Man is stopped. There's something inside him that stops him from just continuing to pound on Boomerang until he's dead, and that's Peter Parker. Peter Parker's ghost actually is still inside Spider-Man's mind, I guess, in Peter Parker's body's brain or something like that, and he stops Otto Octavius from still kicking the crap out of Boomerang until he's dead. And that's another running trend all the way through this series, definitely all the way through My Own Worst Enemy, is that Peter Parker is there, but he's not there. He's there in the spiritual sense, but in the physical sense, he ain't there at all. And a big sort of thing all the way through My Own Worst Enemy is how Peter Parker has to suffer with Otto Octavius using his body and using Spider-Man in the incorrect way. Like I said, in the Superior Spider-Man, Otto Octavius is a lot more ruthless as Spider-Man than Peter Parker would be, and it's killing Peter Parker inside to have to see Otto Octavius be so unjust as Peter Parker would, I guess would say. So Peter Parker is still around. He's not completely dead, and you find that at the end of the first issue. Which I've got to be honest with you, I was a bit disappointed in that, because I mean, I would have thought reading this with Peter Parker being dead and Otto Octavius being there as Spider-Man, I personally would have thought that you would have given the reader more of a chance to have to think about life without Peter Parker. So maybe another 1 or 2 issues of just Otto Octavius being Spider-Man without Peter Parker's spirit being around. But at the same time, I guess I can understand why the writers wouldn't do that, considering that Superior Spider-Man is obviously, it's Otto Octavius, it's no longer Peter Parker. If some kid or some real hardcore Spider-Man fan was to pick up this graphic novel, right, and just flick through it, and by the end of the first issue in this trade paperback, he saw that Spider-Man was actually now Dr. Octopus, they would probably shit on it and think, well, I'm not buying that, because what the hell, it's not Peter Parker, it's Otto Octavius. So I can understand that they probably don't want to miss out on sales, because a lot of people have a big emotional attachment to Peter Parker, because let's face it, for the last 50 years he's been Spider-Man, and you know, with little kids and for real hardcore fans, that's gonna really tick them off, and it might put them off buying this. So I can understand where they're coming from with that, but I personally would have had Peter Parker be completely out of the picture for at least a couple more issues. And if you haven't read this yet, I apologise wholeheartedly for spoiling that for you, but it is a big, I think it's something I need to explain as part of my review. From here on out though, I promise that this is going to be fairly spoiler free. Outside of that, obviously, as you can guess then, this whole first issue, this whole first trade paperback rather, is Otto Octavius, as I said earlier, adjusting to be life as Peter Parker. My Own Worst Enemy actually talks about Otto Octavius's first whole month of being Peter Parker as being Spider-Man, and it's quite a tumultuous month, to say the least. all the way through this graphic novel, Spider-Man does see, you know, a few of his old enemies, even ones that, you know, somebody who doesn't read the comics religiously like me will recognise. You've got the Vulture in there, who plays a big part in this first trade paperback. He's one of the big enemies that Spider-Man has to go against. And it's actually interesting, I won't spoil it for you, but it's actually interesting that the Vulture is actually able to hit a nerve with Otto Octavius in such a way that even Otto Octavius in Spider-Man's body takes a step back and he's like, God damn, how could you do that? And I actually really enjoyed that. You saw a more human side to Otto Octavius in this graphic novel that you probably haven't seen from him in the past, and you don't see of him in here up until that point. I'm not going to say what happens, but Adrian Toomes, the Vulture, like I said, causes Otto Octavius to take a step back, reflect on things that have happened in his own life in his past, and go, yeah, you know, I'm a bad guy and I have been a bad guy, but even that is fucking low. And I actually really like that, you know, that when I was reading it, that was an unexpected twist. I was like, okay, that's a surprise, but I do like that. I enjoy being, you know, I enjoy surprises when they're good like that, and that was a good one. That was a good one. Like I said, I never would have pictured Otto Octavius having that sort of emotion. And speaking of which, it's a running trend as well that Peter Parker has clearly changed, and even if people don't notice, if not everybody notices, some people do notice in little ways that he's different. People who know him personally think that he's a bit colder. People who don't know him but know Spider-Man, when they see him as Spider-Man and there's certain things that he does and certain things that he says, people turn around and say, well, it's weird, that is Spider-Man or that is Peter Parker, but there's something amiss about him, there's something different about him there. And that, like I say, that's pretty much the backbone of Superior Spider-Man, I guess. The whole backbone is Otto Octavius devoting his life to being a superior Spider-Man, but at the same time he has to try and sort of wing it so that nobody suspects what's happened. There is actually somebody in this graphic novel and in the series so far, I guess, who suspects that something really is off about Peter Parker. And at the same time, the real Peter Parker, the Ghost, is actually frightened for this person's safety now, because if she finds out that, you know, Spider-Man Peter Parker isn't actually Peter Parker anymore, he's frightened for her safety. I'm not going to say who it is, but I will say this to you: it is not Mary Jane, for anybody who might have thought that. However, at the same time, Mary Jane is in this book a lot, as you'd expect. I mean, she was like Peter Parker's main squeeze for many years, and well, for many years, 50 years, I guess. And it's really funny, but I guess Otto Octavius has some knowledge of Mary Jane, and he thinks it's a real crime that Peter Parker decided to let her go. So in one of the funnier parts of this graphic novel, right, Otto Octavius is pretty much hunting down Mary Jane. He's trying to like break her down so that he'll go out on a date with her and he'll get somewhere with her, if you know what I'm saying. And if you don't know what I'm saying, use your adult imagination for that. He takes her out, he schmoozes her, and he's trying to hit a home run, so to speak, I guess, with her. And through that, there's a series of what he calls Watson dating trials. And all the way through these dating trials, after each date, he gives a result. So after the first date, the results are inconclusive. The second date is thoroughly disappointing, And number 3 is actually infuriating. So, and the result of date number 3 being infuriating is because Mary Jane gives Peter Parker, who's Otto Octavius, a peck on the cheek. And she says, "I want to thank you for letting me take things slow, Peter." And Peter goes, "I completely understand." And his tone is so cold that the speech bubble is actually got little icicles on it. If you can see it there, I'm not sure if you can. I think you can. And another amusing thing about all this is how Peter Parker, the real Peter Parker, is always in the background, and he has to suffer Otto Octavius making moves on his woman. Eventually, though, with Otto Octavius being such a smart guy, he finally figures out that Peter Parker isn't all Mary Jane wants. She's a bit of a wild chick, so she wants to take a walk on the wild side every now and then. She wants the Spider-Man side of Peter Parker as well. And Otto Octavius figures that out, and he takes Mary Jane on a ride as Peter Parker, web-slinging all the way across New York. And he's kind of starting to get somewhere, which is interesting. However, a bit later on is when the Vulture makes his appearance, and Mary Jane is endangered, is put in danger. And Otto Octavius is now feeling Peter Parker's emotions, and he saves her. But through doing that, he realises to be a superior Spider-Man, he can't have these feelings for Mary Jane. So in a scientific way, he decides to eliminate that problem, and he just sort of saves Mary Jane and then just like gets the hell out of there as quick as he can. And he sort of says to himself that he's done with Mary Jane, because that's going to hold him back, and nothing can hold this guy back because he's the better Spider-Man. He's a superior Spider-Man, as I said before. So yeah, I mean, I don't want to give too much more away, like I said, because I don't want to spoil it for the people who haven't read it yet. But there are a lot of surprises in this book for the casual, like, Marvel fan. If you're a fan of like the movies, for example, but you don't read the comics, it might surprise you to know that J. Jonah Jameson is actually the mayor of New York, which shocked the hell out of me, to be honest. I didn't know that. And in a funny twist, because Otto Octavius isn't Peter Parker anymore and isn't a sarcastic little prick, I think Jonah Jameson is actually starting to sort of warm up to this new Spider-Man, mostly because he saved something from a memorial wing of the university that's like, what is it? NSU or something like that. It's the university that's big in the Spider-Man series, basically. He saves like a memorial wing, or he saves something from being stolen from the memorial wing that I suspect is named after Jonah Jameson's wife, and that's when he really warms up to Spider-Man. So much so that he makes a bat signal for Spider-Man to respond to, and Spider-Man completely trashes that. Reason being that he says it's completely stupid to have like a spider signal, if you like, because if he sees the spider signal and he goes to this rooftop to meet with Jonah Jameson to find out what's wrong, his enemies are actually going to figure out where he's going to be, and he thinks that's completely stupid. But at the last second, he saves himself. As you can see, this is a part of it here. Down here you see Jonah Jameson there and Spider-Man's there, and they're beginning to have an argument. But what actually happens is, I'll read it to you. So Spider-Man sort of ruins the spider signal, and Jonason's like, "That was city property, tens of thousands of taxpayers' dollars. Why, you web-headed half-wit? What do you have to say for yourself?" Well, and Spider-Man goes, "Well, what? Isn't it obvious, Your Honor? Apparently I passed your little test." Jonah Jameson, "Test? What are you talking about?" And then Spider-Man interrupts him. a giant beacon in the sky announcing to all my enemies where they can find me. And the idiot would put that into effect, and Mayor J. Jonah Jameson is no idiot. So clearly it was a test, and I passed. And Jonah goes, yes, well done. So Spider-Man kind of saves his ass in the eyes of the mayor, who used to really hate Spider-Man in that sense. And it's little twists and turns like that I actually find really sort of charming and engaging about this book. On the whole, it's really good. I really enjoy it because it's weird in a sense. It's Spider-Man, but at the same time, it's not Spider-Man. You know, it is actually the perfect way to reset, rebrand and reboot Spider-Man if you think about it. Let's face it, you've had, I guess, what was it, the Amazing Spider-Man series, the Spectacular Spider-Man series, then you had Ultimate Spider-Man, which I think was like not a reboot, but it's like a Spider-Man that was going in a completely different direction from the norm. And I guess with this Marvel Now series, with Marvel wanting to reset and reboot everything, they were like, well, what can we do to make Spider-Man different? And some genius of a person really turned around and said, I got it. We'll kill Spider-Man and we'll keep Spider-Man going by replacing him. But instead of the typical sense of killing Peter Parker and then somebody just taking his place, we'll take Peter Parker out of the equation for now and replace him with somebody who's one of his old nemesis, and make him be Spider-Man for a while. That, to be honest, is brilliant. I think it's brilliant. I wouldn't have thought of it. And like I said, it kind of humanises the villain as well. It, eventually, as you'll come to find out when you read My Own Worst Enemy, you'll find that maybe Otto Octavius isn't just your basic cold-hearted villain. There are some interesting bits of humanity in him. And like I said, that event that makes him stand back and go, wow, even for me that's bad. I wanted to learn more about Otto Octavius through that, because it's like, okay, so that happened to him in the past. That's interesting. Did that sort of series of events cause him to turn out to be the maniacal villain that he was in Spider-Man? It's a very, very interesting story, and like I said, I've read all the way through this one, and it actually really makes me want to pick up the next one and find out what happens in the next one, because my friend Tom was such a good mate that he picked up this one for me, and the next one in the series, which I assume is the next graphic novel that comprises issues 6 through 10 or 6 through 11 or whatever. So I suppose you're asking, well, I suppose you might have been wondering, but you don't need to wonder now, do I recommend The Superior Spider-Man to you? You know, it's a no-brainer. It's a clear, obvious answer. Yes, go pick it up. If I had to rate this, I would rate it 10 out of 10, A+, and all that sort of good stuff. The one interesting thing to note, though, with The Superior Spider-Man is it's a very polarizing idea, and it's a very polarizing series. As I said earlier, you know, kids who are used to Spider-Man being Peter Parker, the sarcastic, witty, good guy who will drop everything in his life to make sure that justice is done, because with great power comes great responsibility, might not like the fact that he's been replaced with somebody who is just all about getting the job done in the coldest, most scientific and practical way possible. And at the same time, a lot of hardcore Spider-Man fans don't like it either. I found out that a lot of them are like, what a stupid idea this is, you know, this isn't Spider-Man. When you take away Peter Parker, you take away Spider-Man, so in that sense, why the fuck you even bother carrying on with it? You should have just put a slug in the back of Peter Parker's head and just killed Spider-Man completely. But let's face it, I think it's obvious in a way that Peter Parker is going to find a way of coming back in some way, shape or form. I don't know what it is yet, and I think a big hook for The Superior Spider-Man will be how does Peter Parker come back? How does he get his body back from Otto Octavius, and how does he get out of Otto Octavius's dead body? And that actually makes me wonder what's going to happen to Otto Octavius after Peter Parker gets back into his body, his own body. Is he going to coexist in that brain with Otto Octavius, and is Spider-Man going to become some kind of schizophrenic? Or is Peter Parker just going to literally, like, erase Otto Octavius completely and just go back to being normal Spider-Man? Or is Peter Parker gonna get back into his body and find a way of extracting Otto Octavius's mind out of his body, and then do something with it so that Otto Octavius is still alive? I don't know, and to be honest, that's a big part of what makes me interested to learn more. This came out in January, I guess, as a big part of the whole Marvel Now rebranding thing, that I'm not completely aware of it and how it goes. But I will tell you this, I have the first 2 graphic novels, and I will be picking up the others, because I'm actually very, very interested to see where this goes. And to be honest with you, what a better way for me to get on the ground floor with something to do with Spider-Man for a change. When I heard about this concept, I thought, this has balls, and the people who wrote this have balls, because to nix a guy as popular as Peter Parker in that sense, you know, Marvel ran the risk of alienating every Spider-Man fan out there, as opposed to alienating some and captivating others. But at the same time, they've drawn me in with this radical idea, and at the same time, they probably have drawn in thousands of more people who are now just going to carry on buying these, collecting these, reading these to find out where it goes. And you know, Marvel's going to make lots and lots and lots of money, so that those executives who own Marvel can buy themselves bigger boats. And you know, that's what it's always about. It's just executives trying to find ways of making more money so they can buy bigger boats. And you know what? Considering that their quest to buy bigger boats has led to Superior Spider-Man, I say that those bigger boats are well deserved. This Superior Spider-Man is available in trade paperback graphic novel form now. The first one, My Own Worst Enemy, is obviously out now. The second one is out now, and I believe the third one is about to come out, or the fourth one, I'm not entirely sure which. But at a price of only $10.99 for 5 issues of this great comic book series, I urge you, get out there, go find it, pick it up, read it, enjoy it, because this isn't just Spider-Man, this is Superior Spider-Man. See you next time.